Hi everybody, welcome to another Storytime with Sid. It is me, Sidney of Hightower, as it is every week, and here we are again with another story. We're starting a new book! This is so exciting! I'm very grateful because I have an amazing friend that gave me this amazing book that we're going to start reading today, and it's a treasury of Irish and fairy folk tales from varying sources. And I am, look how pretty it is. It makes me so happy because it's so pretty, and then look at the back. It's still so pretty. Anyway, I'm very excited to get started in this book, and actually, they were kind enough to bookmark what they think the first story I should read is. So we're going to delve into that. I haven't looked at it, so I don't know what it is. Maybe that was a bad idea, but I am very, very excited to start reading the story. So let's get started. This is The Insulted Banshee. Some years ago, there dwelt in the vicinity of Mountrath in the Queen's County a farmer whose name, for obvious reasons, we shall not at present disclose. He was never married, and his only domestics were a servant boy and an old woman, a housekeeper, who had long been a follower or dependent of the family. He was born and educated in the Roman Catholic Church, but on arriving at manhood, for reasons best known to himself, he abjured the tenets of that creed and conformed to the doctrines of Protestantism. However, in after years he seemed to waver, and refused to go to church, and by his manner of living seemed to favor the dogmas of infidelity or atheism. He was rather dark and reserved of his manner, and oftentimes sullen and gloomy in his temper, and this, joined with his well-known discard of religion, served to render him somewhat unpopular amongst his neighbors and acquaintances. However, he was a general respected and was never insulted or annoyed. He was considered as an honest, inoffensive man, and as he was well supplied with firearms and ammunition, in the use of which he was well practiced, having in his early days served several years in yeomanry corps, few liked to disturb him, even had they been so disposed. He was well educated and decidedly hostile to every species of superstition, and was constantly jeering his old housekeeper, who was extremely superstitious, and pretended to be entirely conversant with every matter connected with witchcraft in the fairy world. He seldom darkened a neighbor's door, and scarcely ever asked anyone to enter his, but generally spent his leisure hours in reading, of which he was extremely fond, or in furbishing his firearms, to which he was still more attached, or in listening and laughing at the wild and blood-curdling stories of old Moya, with which her memory abounded. Thus he spent his time until the period at which our tale commences, when he was about 50 years of age, and old Moya, the housekeeper, had become extremely feeble, stooped, and of very ugly and forbidding exterior. One morning, in the month of November, A.D. 1818, this man arose before daylight, and on coming out of the apartment where he slept, he was surprised at finding old Moya in the kitchen, sitting over a rigged fire and smoking her tobacco pipe in a very serious and meditative mood. "Arrah, Moya," said he, "what brings you out of your bed so early?" "Och, musha, I dunna," replied the old woman. "I was so uneasy all night that I couldn't sleep a wink, and I got up to smoke a blast, thinking that it might drive away the weight that's on my heart." "And what ails you, Moya? Are you sick, or what came over you?" "No, the Lord be praised, I'm not sick, but my heart is sore, and there's a load on my spirits that would kill 100. "Maybe you were dreaming or something that way," said the man in a bantering tone, and suspected from the old woman's grave manner that she was laboring under some mental delusion. "Dreaming!" re-echoed Moya, with a bitter sneer. "I dreaming! Och! I wish to God I was only dreaming. But I'm very afraid it's worse than that, and there was trouble and misfortune hanging over us." "And what makes you think so, Moya?" asked he, with a half-suppressed smile. Moya, aware of his well-known hostility to every species of superstition, remained silent, biting her lips, shaking her grey head prophetically. "Why don't you answer me, Moya?" again asked the man. "Och," said Moya, "I'm heart-scalded to have to tell you, and I know you will laugh at me, but say you will. There is something bad over us, for the Banshee was about the house all night, and she has me almost frightened out of my wits with her shouting and bawling." The man was aware of the banshees having been long supposed to haunt his family, but often scouted that supposition. Yet it was some years since he had heard of her visiting the place, and he was not prepared for the freezing announcement of old Moya. He turned as pale as a corpse, and trembled excessively. At last, recollecting himself, he said with a forced smile, "And how do you know it's the Banshee, Moya?" "How do I know?" reiterated Moya tauntingly. "Didn't I see and hear her several times during the night? And more than that, I didn't hear the dead coach rattling round the house and through the yard every night at midnight this week back, as if it would tear the house out of the foundation." The man smiled faintly. He was frightened, yet was ashamed to appear so. He again said, "And did you ever see the Banshee before, Moya?" "Yes," replied Moya. "Often. Didn't I see her when your mother died? Didn't I see her when your brother was drowned? And sure there wasn't one in the family these 60 years that did not both see and hear her." "And where did you see her, and what way did she look tonight?" "I saw her at the little window over my bed. A kind of reddish light shone round the house. I looked up, and there I saw her old pale face and glassy eyes looking in. And she rocked herself to and fro, and clapping her little withered hands, and crying as if her very heart would break." "Well, Moya, it's all imagination. Go now and prepare my breakfast, as I want to go to Mayborough today, and I must be home early." Moya trembled. She looked at him imploringly and said, "For heaven's sake, John, don't go today. Stay till some other day. God bless you, for if you go today, I would have given my oath there'd be something across you that's bad." "Nonsense, woman," said he. "Make haste and get me my breakfast." Moya, with tears in her eyes, set about getting the breakfast ready, and whilst she was so employed, John was engaged in making preparations for his journey. Having now completed his other arrangements, he sat down to breakfast, and having concluded it, he arose to depart. Moya ran to the door, crying loudly. She flung herself on her knees and said, "John, John, be advised. Don't go today. Take my advice. I know more of the world than you do, and I see plainly that if you go, you will never enter this door again with your life." Ashamed to be influenced by the drivellings of an old cullah, he pushed her away with his hand, and going out to the stable, mounted his horse and departed. Moya followed him with her eyes whilst in sight, and while she could no longer see him, she sat down at the fire and wept bitterly. It was a bitter cold day, and the farmer, having finished his business in town, feeling himself chilly, went into a public house to have a tumbler of punch and feed his horse. There he met an old friend who would not part with him until he would have another glass with him and a little conversation, as it was many years since they had met before. One glass brought another, and it was almost duskish ere John thought of returning, and having nearly 10 miles to travel, it would be dark at night before he could get home. Still, his friend could not permit him to go, but called for more liquor, and it was far advanced in the night before they parted. John, however, had a good horse, and having had him well fed, he did not spare whip or spur, but dashed along at a rapid pace through the gloom and silence of the winter's night, and had already distanced the town upward of 5 miles when, on arriving at a very desolate part of the road, 2 strange men who had been at the same public house in Mayborough drinking, observing that he had money, and learning that the road he was to travel, conspired to rob and murder him, and waylaid him in this lonely spot for that horrid purpose. Poor Moya did not go to bed that night, but sat at the fire every moment impatiently expecting his return. Often did she listen at the door to try to see if she could hear the tramp of the horse's footsteps approaching, but in vain. No sound met her ear except the sad wail of the night wind moaning fitfully through the tall bushes which surrounded the ancient dwelling, or the sullen roar of the dark little river which wound its way through the low lands at a small distance from where she stood. Tired with watching, at length she fell asleep on the hearthstone, but that sleep was disturbed and broken, and frightful and appalling dreams incessantly haunted her imagination. At length the darksome mornings appeared struggling through the wintry clouds, and Moya again opened the door to look out. But what was her dismay when she found the horse standing at the stable door without its rider, and the saddle all besmeared with clotted blood. She raised the death cry, and the neighbors thronged round, and it was at once declared that the hapless man was robbed and murdered. A party on horseback immediately set forward to seek him, and on arriving at the fatal spot he was found, stretched on his back in the ditch, his head perforated with shots and slugs, and his body literally immersed in a pool of blood. On examining him, it was found that his money was gone, and a valuable gold watch and appendages abstracted from his pocket. His remains were conveyed home, and after having been waked the customary time, were committed to the grave of his ancestors in the little green churchyard of the village. Having no legitimate children, the nearest heir to his property was a brother, a cabinet maker who resided in London. A letter was accordingly dispatched to the brother announcing the sad catastrophe, and calling on him to come and take possession of the property, and 2 men were appointed to guard the place until he should arrive. The 2 men delegated to act as guardians, or as they technically termed, keepers, were old friends and comrades of the deceased, and had served with him in the same yeomanry corps. Jack O'Malley was a Roman Catholic, a square, stout-built, and handsome fellow with a pleasant word for everyone, and full of gaiety, vivacity, and nonchalance for which the Roman Catholic peasantry of Ireland are so particularly distinguished. He was now 45 years of age, sternly attached to the dogmas of his religion, and always remarkable for his revolutionary and anti-British principles. He was brave as a lion, and never quailed before a man, but though caring so little for living man, he was extremely afraid of a dead one, and would go 10 miles out of his road at night to avoid passing a rath or a haunted bush. Harry Taylor, on the other hand, was a staunch Protestant, a tall, genteel-looking man of proud and imperious aspect, and full of reserve and hauteur. The natural consequence of a consciousness of political and religious ascendancy, and a superiority of intelligence and education, which so conspicuously marked the demeanor of the Protestant peasantry of those days. Harry, too, loved his glass as well as Jack, but was of more peaceful disposition, and he was well educated and intelligent. He was utterly opposed to superstition, and laughed to scorn the mere idea of ghosts, goblins, and fairies. Thus, Jack and Harry were diametrically opposed to each other in every point except for their love of Cruiskeen. Yet they never failed to seize every opportunity of being together, and although they often blackened each other's eyes in their political and religious disputes, yet their quarrels were always amicably settled, and they never found themselves happy but in each other's company. It was now 6th or 7th night that Jack and Harry, as usual, kept their lonely watch in the kitchen of the murdered man. A large turf fire blazed brightly on the hearth, and on a bed of straw, an ample chimney corner, was stretched old Moya in profound sleep. On the hearthstone between the 2 friends stood a small oak table, on which was placed a large decanter of whiskey, a jug of boiled water, and a bowl of sugar. And, as if to add an idea of security to that of comfort, on the end of the table was placed a saltire, a formidable-looking blunderbuss, and a brace of large brass pistols. Jack and his comrade perpetually renewed their acquaintance with the whiskey bottle, and laughed and chatted and recounted the adventures of their young days with as much hilarity as if the house was now witness their mirth, never echoed the cry of death or blood. In the course of conversation, Jack mentioned the incident of the strange appearance of the Banshee, and expressed a hope that she would not come that night to disturb their carouse. "Banshee the devil!" shouted Harry. "How superstitious you papists are! I would like to see the phiz of any man, dead or alive, who dare make his appearance here tonight." And seizing the blunderbuss and looking wickedly at Jack, he vociferated, "By Hercules, I would drive the contents of this through the sows who dare annoy us." "Better you to shoot your mother than fire at a banshee anyhow," remarked Jack. "Psh!" said Harry, looking contemptuously at his companion. "I would think no more of riddling the old jade's hide than I would of throwing off this tumbler." And to suit the action of the word, he drained off another bumper of whiskey punch. "Jack," says Harry, "now that we're such in prime humor, will you give us a song?" "With all the veins in my heart," says Jack. "What will it be?" "Anything you please. Your will must be my pleasure," answered Harry. Jack, after coughing and clearing his pipes, chanted forth, in a bold and musical voice, a rude rigmarole called the Royal Blackbird, which, although of no intrinsic merit yet, as it is expressed sentiments hostile to British connection and British government, and favourable to the House of Stuart, was very popular among the Catholic peasantry of Ireland, whilst, on the contrary, it was looked upon by the Protestants as highly offensive and disloyal. Harry, however, wished his companion too well to oppose the song, and he quietly awaited its conclusion. "Bravo, Jack," said Harry as soon as the song was ended, "that you may never lose your wind. In the king's name now I board you for another song," says Jack. Harry, without hesitation, recognized his friend's right to demand a return, and instantly trolled forth in a deep, sweet, and sonorous voice in the following. "Ho, boys, I have a song divine. Come, let us now in concert join, and toast the bonny banks of Boyne, the Boyne of glorious memory. On Boyne's famed banks our fathers bled, Boyne's surges with their blood ran red, and from Boyne our foremen fled, intolerance, chains, and slavery. Dark superstitions of blood-stained sons press on the back, but crack went William's guns, and soon the gloomy monster runs, fell hydra-headed bigotry. Then fill your glasses high and fair, let shouts of triumph rend the air, whilst Gregory fills the regal chair, will never bow to popery." Jack, whose countenance had, from the commencement of the song, indicated his aversion to the sentiment it expressed, now lost all patience at hearing his darling popery impugned, and seizing one of the pistols which lay on the table and whirling it over his comrade's head, swore vehemently that he would fracture his skull if he did not instantly drop that blackguard orange lampoon. "I see a Vic," said Harry, quietly pushing away the upraised arm. "I did not oppose your bit of treason a while ago, and besides, the latter end of my song is more calculated to please you than to irritate your feelings." Jack seemed pacified, and Harry continued to strain. "And fill a bumper to the brim, a flowing one, and drink to him, who let the world go sink or swim, would arm for Britain's liberty. No matter what may be his hue, or black or white or green or blue, or papist, paynim, or Hindu, we'll drink to him right cordially." Jack was so pleased with his friendly turn which the latter part of Harry's song took, that he joyfully stretched out his hand and even joined in chorus to the concluding stanza. The fire had now decayed on the hearth, and the whiskey bottle was almost emptied, and the two sentinels, getting drowsy, put out the candle and laid down their heads to slumber. The song and the laugh and the jest were now hushed. No sound was to be heard but the incessant click, click, click of the clock in the inner room, and the deep, heavy breathing of old Moya in the chimney corner. They had slept they did not know how long, when the old hag awakened with a wild shriek. She jumped out of bed and crouched between the men. They started up and asked her what happened. "Oh!" she exclaimed. The Banshee! Lord have mercy on us, she's come again! And I've never heard her so wild and outrageous before." Jack O'Malley readily believed old Moyle's tale. So did Harry, but he thought it might be someone who was committing some depredation on the premises. They both listened attentively, but could hear nothing. They opened the kitchen door, but all was still. They looked abroad. It was fine, a calm night, and myriads of twinkling stars were burning in the deep blue heavens. They proceeded around the yard and hay yard, but all was calm and lonely, and no sound saluted their ears but the shrill barking of some neighboring cur, or the sluggish murmuring of the little tortuous river in the distance. Satisfied that all was right, they again went in, replenished the expiring fire, and sat down to finish whatever still remained of the whiskey bottle. They had not sat many minutes when a wild, unearthly cry was heard without. "The Banshee again!" said Moya faintly. Jack O'Malley's soul sank within him. Harry started up and seized the blunderbuss, but Jack caught his arm. No, Harry. You shall not. Sit down. There's no fear. Nothing will happen to us." Harry sat down, but gripped the blunderbuss, and Jack lit his tobacco pipe, whilst the old woman was on her knees, striking her breast and repeating the prayers with great vehemence. The sad cry was again heard, louder and fiercer than before. It now seemed to proceed from the window, and again it appeared as if issuing from the door. At times it would seem as if coming from afar, whilst again it would appear as if coming down the chimney or springing from the ground beneath their feet. Sometimes the cry resembled the low, plaintive wail of a female in distress, and in a moment it was raised to a prolonged yell, loud and furious, as if coming from 1,000 throats. Now the sound resembled a low, melancholy chant, and then was quickly changed to a loud, broken, demonic laugh. It continued thus, with little intermission, for about a quarter of an hour, when it died away, and was succeeded by a heavy creaking sound, as if some large wagon, amidst which the loud tramp of horses' footsteps might be distinguished, accompanied with a strong rushing wind. The strange noise proceeded round and round the house 2 or 3 times, and went down the lane which led to the road, and was heard no more. Jack O'Malley stood aghast, and Harry Taylor, with all his philosophy and scepticism, was astonished and frightened. "A dreadful night this, Moya," said Jack. "Yes," said she. "This is the dead coach. I often heard it before, and have sometimes seen it." "Seen, you say?" said Harry. "Pray describe it." "Why," said the old crone, "it's like any other coach, but twice as big, and hung over with black cloth, and black coffin on top of it, and drawn by headless black horses." "Heaven protect us!" ejaculated Jack. "It is very strange," remarked Harry. "But," continued Moya, "it always comes before the death of a person, and I wonder what brought it now unless it came with the Banshee." "Maybe it's coming for you," said Harry with an arch yet subdued smile. "No, no," she said. "I'm none of the family at all." A solemn silence now ensued for a few minutes, and they thought all was vanished, when again the dreadful cry struck heavily to their ears. "Open the door, Jack," said Harry, "and put out Hector." Hector was a large and very ferocious mastiff belonging to Jack O'Malley, and always accompanied him wherever he went. Jack opened the door and attempted to put out the dog, but the poor animal refused to go, and his master attempted to force him. He howled in a loud and mournful tone. "You must go," said Harry, and he caught him in his arms and flung him over the half-door. The poor dog was scarcely on the ground when he was whirled aloft into the air by some invisible power. Then he fell again to the earth lifeless, and the pavement was besmeared with his entrails of blood. Harry now lost all his patience, and again seizing his blunderbuss, he exclaimed, "Come, Jack, my boy, take your pistol and follow me. I have but one life to lose, and I will venture to have it crack in this infernal demon." "I will follow you to death's doors," said Jack, "but I would not fire the Banshee for millions of worlds." Moya seized Harry by the skirts. "Don't go out," she cried. "Let her alone while she lets you alone, for an hour's luck never shone on anyone that ever molested the Banshee." "Psh, woman," said Harry, and he pushed away poor Moya contemptuously. The 2 men now sallied forth. The wild cry still continued, and it seemed to issue from amongst some stacks in the hay-yard behind the house. They went round and paused again as they heard the cry, and Harry elevated his blunderbuss. "Don't fire," said Jack. Harry replied not. He looked scornfully at Jack, then put his finger on the trigger, and bang away exploded with a thundering sound. An extraordinary scream was now heard 10 times louder and more terrific than they heard before. Their hair stood erect on their heads, and huge round drops of sweat ran down their faces in quick succession. A glare of reddish-blue light shone round the stacks. The rumbling of the dead coach was again heard coming. It drove up to the house, drawn by 6 headless stable horses, and the figure of a withered old hag encircled with blue flame was seen running nimbly across the hay-yard. She entered the ominous carriage, and it drove away with a horrible sound. It swept through the tall bushes which surrounded the house, and as it disappeared, the old hag cast a thrilling scowl at the 2 men, and waved her fleshless arms at them vengefully. It was soon lost to sight, but the unearthly creaking of the wheels, the tramping of the horses, and the appalling cries of the Banshee continued to assail their ears for a considerable time after all had vanished. The brave fellows now returned to the house. They again made fast the door and reloaded their arms. Nothing, however, came to disturb them that night, nor from that time forward, and the arrival of the dead man's brother from London in a few days after relieved them from this irksome task. Old Moya did not live long after. She declined from that remarkable night, and her remains were decently interred in the churchyard adjoining the last earthly tenement of the loved family for which she had so long and so faithfully been attached. The insulted Banshee has never since returned, and although several members of that family have since closed their mortal career, still the warning cry was never given, and it is supposed that the injured spirit will never have visited her ancient haunts until every one of the existing generation shall have slept with their fathers. Jack O'Malley and his friend Harry lived some years after. Their friendship still continued undiminished, like Tam O'Shanter and Souter Johnny. They still continued to love each other like a very brother, and like that jovial pair, also, our 2 comrades were often for a week together, and often over their cruise-scheme they would laugh at their strange adventure with the Banshee. It is now, however, all over with them too. Their race is run, and they are now tenants of the tomb. And that was The Insulted Banshee. Oh, yay. Oh, it feels so good to finish a new story. Well, that was certainly interesting. I'm going to be honest. I wish I'd looked up that this story was about banshees before I read it, but it was still a very nice surprise. Because to be honest with you, I don't really know that much about banshees. I know, of course, that they're traditionally Irish and that they're known for their wails and their screams, and they come in the form of a woman. And I guess from this story we learned that banshees also prophesize the death of a family member. But other than that, I don't really know much. It is very interesting, though, in this story, and I think this might be a trend with this book, the very clear delineation between Protestant and Catholics in the Irish community. One that's, I'm sure is still probably very prevalent today, but that is, you know, a part of the Irish flag, the green, the white, and the orange. Green is Catholic, orange is Protestant. That's why on St. Patrick's Day, if you wear orange, is considered very offensive, because St. Patrick is Catholic and was famous for driving all of the snakes out of Ireland. So that's why you wear green if you're Catholic. Yeah, it's very interesting. There's a lot of really rich history in Ireland, a lot of really interesting history. It was also interesting to see the difference between, you know, how the Irish feel about the British, because, of course, the British forcibly took Ireland against most of the Irish people's will, and has not treated them properly for a very long time. So that was very interesting to delve into, but I'm not really sure if there is a moral that can be pulled from this story, other than sometimes a blunderbuss really does wonders against the supernatural. I mean, generally I would recommend not shooting at things that you don't understand, but, you know, take everything I say also with a grain of salt. But I am really excited to delve into this book and to get further into these stories, so thank you so much for joining me for a treasury of Irish fairy and folktales. Thank you so much. I hope you're all staying happy, healthy, and safe, and I'll see you next week.